Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Tactics Board. We've barely had time to digest Norwich City's 1-1 draw with Leeds United, but they're already back in action this weekend. They take on Hull in their second Carrow Road game of the week, and they're hoping to extend some positive form, also their very long unbeaten home run. But Hull won't make it easy. They've been in good form themselves. They'll come to Carrow Road full of confidence and feeling like they can end that streak. Here on Tactics Board, I'm going to take you through the team that I think Johannes Hoff-Torp will choose for the game, some of the strategic and tactical elements of the game, and then we're going to take a look a little bit later on at inverted fullbacks, the role they play at Norwich and the benefits that they bring. We'll get to all of that, but we're going to start with that starting 11. So without further ado, here it is. So I've gone for Angus Gunn in goal, Kellen Fisher at right back, Shane Duffy and Jose Cordoba at centre back, with Callum Doyle at left back, Kenny McLean, Marcelino Nunez and Anis Ben Slimani in the midfield, with Ante Cianats on the right, Borja Sainz on the left and Josh Sargent on his own up front. I've gone unchanged from that Leeds draw, and I know that does sound like a bold call, and to be honest, it probably is given the fitness elements around it. I've chosen to go fairly optimistic in a couple of areas. One of them, of course, is centre-back, and I thought we wouldn't be talking about this area for a while on Tactics Board, given how solid that defence looked, how good it was, the fact that Ben Krasene was injured, and that probably didn't give too many options in that sort of left-sided shake-up either. However, at half-time, Cordoba came off in that game with a knee injury that Torp didn't really tell us much about post-match, but it does sound fairly worrying when you hear about those areas of the body, and we know how long that can keep a player out for. We're going to hear from Torp at his pre-match press conference tomorrow. And I think that is quite a huge call when you look at how Cordoba has impacted Norwich's season, how he's transformed their form after coming into the team. You have to remember that his first start in the Championship was only in that 4-1 win over Watford. Since then, of course, 2 wins, 3 games unbeaten, a real step up in the levels of performance, and you can see exactly why he was bought this summer. So that is a bit of a concern. Of course, we could go to Colney and find out that he's injured and he's unlikely to start, but I think Norwich will be doing everything to get him into that team, and if he is fit, then he does absolutely start. So I've chosen to be optimistic on that one. Of course, I could end up being proven wrong, but for now, we're going to be positive and say that Cordoba will be fit, and I've got him at centre-back. In midfield, again, I think it's worthy of discussion because Torp said actually before Leeds that the third game in a 3-game week can often be where you see those fitness worries. And I did think, are there any changes that he could make here? Could Slimani be going out? Because obviously he's come back from injury very recently and played quite a hefty chunk of Derby, then a good amount of that draw with Leeds. And you wonder whether he could be in the team once again, given his fitness and the fact that they'll need to build him up. But I just think he gives them something so different and something that they may very well need, given the strengths that Hull have and that we'll come on to, that I think it is difficult for Torp to drop him, especially with this international break now following this. He might be called up by Tunisia, but the fact that he's going to get a break from club football and from the intensity of Championship football and that physicality, I think Torp might be tempted just to throw him in one more time and have him in there, because I think we all saw what he brought against Leeds. Probably not the same level of quality and consistent quality that he showed as a substitute against Derby and against Coventry, but he was much more involved than Oscar Schwartau has been when he's played in that position, than Amankwah Forson has been since that cup win over Stevenage a couple of months ago. And it did feel like he brought something very different. He gave Norwich another creative source and maybe more ability to get forward and hopefully in future to score goals and to gain assists from midfield, which is something you feel is part of almost the next phase of Hoff-ball and something that they need to improve on, having now improved on so many parts of that game. So I think Slimani is very key. I think if he is able to start, then Torp probably will get him in there. It feels like quite a marginal call. I can't see him playing 90 minutes, but I think if I was Torup, I'd be tempted just to gamble on him and start him for this one. Now to come on to Hull, and they definitely won't make it easy. I think people looked at the fixtures this week. They saw Leeds, they saw Hull, and it felt like if Norwich could navigate Leeds successfully and not lose that one, then Hull would feel a bit easier. And on paper, you can understand that. Obviously, Leeds' squad is fantastic and they are a huge club for this level. But Hull have been really, really impressive in their last few games. And even before then, when they were struggling to get the results, their performances were okay, their numbers were pretty good. And I think you look at some of the data that they're producing and you can see actually that they're a team that probably will be in and around that playoff race once again this season. They're 5th for possession in the league, 4th for touches in the final third, 2nd for through balls, 3rd for take-ons. And that tells you a bit about how effective they are offensively, but also a little bit about how they try to do things. Once they get in that final third, they want to get their best players on the ball. They want to go one-on-one. They want to take defenders on and make it about individual quality, which they certainly do have in those wide areas especially. But also they want to progress the ball. They've been very successful at doing that, at turning their possession not only into a tool for defence and conservation, but for getting into the final third and for progressing the ball very quickly. Part of that is the rotation in Tim Walter's system that he's used not only at Hull, but previously at Stuttgart and Hamburg very, very well. It's quite unique because you see players making movements that actually look quite unnatural, quite dangerous, almost things where you feel it's a risk that doesn't need to be taken. But actually, those rotations mean that different players end up in different areas. The opposition don't know who to follow. And eventually you find a spare man, which is what it's all about. Having numerical superiority in various areas of the pitch. Having that spare man who then can have a bit of time on the ball and try to create things for you. So the task for Norwich will be keeping up with that rotation, with maybe having centre-backs going into midfield and midfielders going into centre-back and rotating and having that communication while Hull have the ball so that you're adapting very quickly, so that you're making sure every player is covered. Because if they're just a couple of seconds behind, or the communication isn't great, or they aren't great in the tackle, they'll be 2 steps behind. Hull will be able to find space and they'll be able to get into the final third as they've done so successfully this season. So definitely a big test for Norwich this weekend, but there are ways that they can exploit them, and one of those is with a high press. Hull do want to play out from the back. They want to do it very dynamically, as I said, but right now it doesn't feel like they quite have the players in the back line to do that in terms of their quality on the ball, how comfortable they are with playing it out from the back. They feel slightly vulnerable, and you could see that a little bit when Hull played Cardiff last weekend. Cardiff weren't really able to make the most of that. But when you consider how big a part of Torup's game pressing is, they will relish that opportunity, Norwich, and they will want to get their players taking the ball off the centre-backs, creating chances by winning it high up the pitch. And not only that, but also defensively managing to stop Hull progressing the ball by maybe taking advantage of some of those vulnerabilities. So there are ways that Norwich can get at Hull. It definitely won't be easy though, because they do really have some quality, and tactically especially, they've looked very good under Tim Walter. So to finish with, I just thought we'd talk a little bit about inverted fullbacks. It feels like quite a topical discussion at the moment, given Kellen Fisher's recent form, the reshuffle at half-time against Leeds, and the fact that actually I think Norwich are getting more and more comfortable with that part of their system as time goes on. Of course, they don't have Jack Stacey, that traditional high-wide fullback, anymore since he came out of the 11. You've got 2 there in Callum Doyle and Kellen Fisher, who are very comfortable in the inverted role, and it has given Norwich a lot of benefits. I've spoken about the drawbacks and the negatives before defensively and with the amount of ground that you have to cover, but on the ball I think it gives Norwich a lot, and part of that is the numerical superiority. We spoke about it going into the Watford game, the fact that they played 2 in midfield. Norwich, with their traditional 3 plus the 2 inverted fullbacks, gave them that real superiority, and you see that in most of the games. Obviously, having a 2 in central midfield is quite rare in today's game, but still normally it's a 3. You don't see too many teams that go with inverted fullbacks, and therefore Norwich so often when they play this system can have more numbers in midfield, more options in midfield, more bodies in midfield than the opposition. And when you think about how important control is in the game from midfield, you can see why it's such a big part of Torup's game and his tactical setup, because he's all about control. He's all about making the game about yourselves. And if you can have such dominance in the midfield, it does make it quite a lot easier to dominate the rest of the game, really. And that is a major benefit of it, the numerical superiority. Another part of it is the amount that it requires your opposition to change. I just spoke about the fact that not many teams play with inverted fullbacks. So if you really want to combat the Norwich system, you have to change your structure quite a lot. You have to change what you're asking your players to do. And when we've seen at Norwich how long it takes for players to learn a system, you can see why that might be a problem for quite a lot of Norwich's opposition, is that it's going to be quite difficult for them to adapt to playing against that system, which is quite a rare one, when a lot of the time in the Championship you've only got a couple of days to prepare. So it does feel like strategically it gives Norwich a little bit of an advantage as well. And also the third and final benefit I wanted to highlight was the fact that it gets your wingers into the game more. As you can imagine, the passing lane is more clearly there for the winger without the fullback in the way, and the fullback isn't the first option when a centre-back, for example, or a midfielder wants to go wide. Instead, you can quite easily and quite quickly get the ball into your more creative players, so it's easier to get the likes of Bor Hussain than Ante Sienat into the game. I don't think it's a coincidence that we've seen Sienat more involved since Norwich have been playing those inverted fullbacks than we did prior to that, because he's the only one really in that space. So if Shane Duffy, for example, is looking up and he doesn't have a fullback there, his first option is to go to Sienat. And of course, the opposition aren't covering the empty fullback position either. So it's not like he's got someone blocking that lane as if there were a fullback there. So I think it's easier to get your creative players onto the ball as well, which is, I'm sure, something that Torup is looking to do, given the attacking and the creative focus that he has. He'll hope to use the benefits of that system again against Hull this weekend, even if it won't be an easy one. Of course, we'll have every kit covered across our channels, so go to pinkun.com/subscribe and you won't miss any of that. Thank you very much for joining me on Tactics Board. I'll see you very soon.